Happy week 6, everyone. I am so happy that we finally made it to the last week. I hope that we've learned a lot and you all feel like you have a better understanding, really, of world religions. Obviously, we didn't get to cover all of the religions of the whole world and really even talk about what it means to be a religion. This in and of itself is so varied and so diverse, but I hope you did get a better sense for what it means for a community to be a religious community, what it means for communities to have religious affiliation and to have specific religious traditions that are important and integral to that community, to those spaces, and perhaps even to that specific geographical location. So this week I'm excited about this week for two reasons. Number one is I love talking about sports and religion. As I shared with you all in the beginning of the term, I myself am not much of a sports person. I did swim Division I in college, but I am not really that well versed in the sports world. But I do love sports and religion and how those work together and the things that sports can teach us about religion and the ways that sports can sometimes fill in for religious traditions for people. And then the second reason I'm excited is this is the first time where I'm teaching this unit. So previously we'd been doing Taoism, and I just found that that was a really challenging unit for students because Taoism itself was something that we didn't have a lot of exposure to and familiarity with, and trying to teach it in 7 days was just too much. It was too tight. The timeline just really didn't work. Originally, I had always had this planned into the schedule, but with the express terms, didn't have enough time to do it. So I actually decided I was going to sub out Taoism from sports and religion, and then also atheism and nuns. I think that those things go really well together. How do we talk about sports as religious? How do we talk about sports and religion? And then also, how do we talk about the idea that people who don't affiliate or identify with a religious tradition, how that in and of itself is somewhat of a religious community for those people. So this week you had 2 readings. Joseph Price, The Godding Up of American Sports was your required reading. And then you could pick between the Pew Research Center reading and then the National Geographic reading. We'll talk about all of them in the PowerPoint just in case you read one or the other. So first we're going to talk about Price's The Godding Up of American Sports. So one thing that I want you to think about as we sort of talk is, what can sports help us learn about religion, about ritual, and about community? What ways do sports show us or offer us a microcosm, so a small version of a religious tradition? So Price, in his chapter, uses the example of the Super Bowl to compare sports and religion in the opening pages. He uses words like intense cultic devotion, identity, and pilgrimage. These words are things that you would normally hear about a religious tradition, but Price uses them to talk about sports, specifically to talk about the Super Bowl, that people's affiliations and identities with NFL teams are intense, they're cultic, they're very devotional. They find a lot of identity in the teams that they cheer for and the teams that they root for. And then pilgrimage is this idea of traveling to a specific location to pay homage, to pay honor to something. And you could think about this with people who travel for away games. Fans who will travel to any away game or who even live farther away from their home team. Say you cheer for the Carolina Panthers, but you live in Savannah, Georgia. Being able, if you make that trip every Sunday there's a home game in Charlotte, North Carolina. How is that a pilgrimage? How is that like a pilgrimage, traveling from one location to another, specifically to see this very particular event? Now, the impact of sports really goes beyond religion. What sports do and how sports work in our societies moves much farther than religious traditions and religious affiliation. So sports are drivers of economies, social events, cultural exchanges, political moments, and regional devotion. So in all of these things, sports drive particular economies. As we've seen with COVID, the way that the lack of sporting events have impacted these major hubs that tend to host really large games the cities that normally would host the Super Bowl, the economic impact that all those fans has for that particular city is huge. And so we saw a lot of evidence of this, particularly during COVID, and the loss of these events, the loss of the community events. But you might even think about it the same way that a lot of religious communities took services online. They held services on particular days that you could stream live. You could stream on Facebook, via YouTube. I think some even did Instagram Live. How is that like? How is it similar to or different from people watching sports now exclusively on televisions? We know there were not a lot of opportunities for people to attend sporting events in sort of the past year, 2020 March to now 2021 February. And I'm thinking more in particular about football, right? So how did the lack of football, the lack of attendance at games affect things like the economy, affect things like people's social gatherings, the ways that people exchange in cultural milieu or cultural nuance, right? So what does it mean to lose communities of people and lose out on exchanging in particular culturally enriching events because we don't have sports or we didn't have sports? In the beginning of the chapter, he talks about the way sports have impacted presidential elections. So political moments have even been impacted or impacted themselves sporting events, specifically, again, football. And regional devotion. How does someone's affiliation to a team help them foster a sense of identity or regional identity? If you are from Buffalo, New York, how does being a Buffalo Bills fan impact your identity, your regional identity as being from a specific place? Another question I'd like you to think about is what critiques, as I'm talking, think about what critiques there could be for thinking about sports and religion. So in a lot of ways, I've taught you all term that we don't want to do comparison. That comparison work is actually sometimes more harmful than helpful. So what does it mean to be doing this direct one-to-one comparison to sports and religion? Doesn't that mean that anything could be religious? Could going to the grocery store be a religious event? Could Netflix binging be considered a religious experience? So one thing that I do want you to keep in mind is a criticism of this is that if we start thinking about the ways that things mimic or imitate religious experiences, doesn't that mean that everything could be religious, that everything could be a religious experience? Now, with that in mind, I want you to think about what it means to consider sports to be religious and what that can teach us about religion. What can thinking about sports as religious experiences or religious events teach us specifically about religion? Okay, so these are two kind of things that I want you to hold in contention. Critiques of this model, this one-to-one comparison, but also the ways that this type of model help us actually learn more about religion and religious experiences, because it's something that feels closer to home, specifically in America. Price says, for tens of millions of devoted fans throughout the country, sports constitute a popular form of religion, shaping their world, sustaining their ways of engaging in it. Sports are elevated to kind of a divine status. One might call it the godding up of American sports. Now, one thing that we know to be true is that sports and religion, the idea that these two things can be held together, it's not new, and it's not exclusive to American sport. So he gives a lot of examples on page 291. He gives examples of Greece, of the Mayans, of the Sioux tribe, of people in Japan, and people of Shinto background, okay? America is not the first place to think about sports and religion, and we are certainly not the first to integrate sports and religion. In a lot of other cultures, sport is actually integral and crucial to religious experience in a way that we don't have in America. But we do have sporting events, sporting experiences that we can equate to particular religious events or religious experiences. Something that Price brings up, how are athletes like gods? How do we think about athletes as godlike celebrities? What does this do for us as we think about sports? Okay. Now, what does it mean to think about athletes as gods? Because then we are thinking about sports as being theistic. And we talked about this in the Buddhism Week. Not all religions are theistic. Not all religions have a god. So by using this model, Price quotes Edwards and says, sports have common concern for deities, authority, tradition, beliefs, devotees, ritual sites, and material elements. While all of those things are great core elements to kind of keep in mind when we're talking about religion, what does it say, or what does it mean to think that sports have deities? Does this mean that we can only think about sports as theistic? Unlike Christianity and unlike Judaism and unlike Islam even, there are plenty of religious traditions that don't have gods. They don't have a theistic understanding of what religion is. So another critique would be, what does it mean to think about sports only through a lens of theism? Does this mean that we're again doing a comparison of sports and Christianity, maybe? Particularly in America, we do think of Christianity as sort of being the main religion. Does this mean that sports, or maybe even football, as the main religion is like Christianity? These are all things that I want you to wrestle with as we're doing the readings this week and we're thinking about what it means to think about something like sports as a religious experience. One of the things that I think it's important to think about is that sports don't have all of the elements that we might think of as necessary for being classified as a religion. So a lot of times things that we include in religious experiences are, or religious traditions, are a text or a canon, a set of beliefs, maybe even a god, a place of worship or a place to commune. Sports don't have all of those. So can we still think of it as a religion? My response to this would be yes, because not all religions have these same elements either. Sports help us challenge the notion of what it means to count and to be a religion. Specifically in America, we do such a bad job of teaching people about other religious differences, which is why I emphasized it so heavily in this term, that difference is important. Everything does not need to be a one-to-one comparison. Buddhism does not need to be like Christianity. Christianity does not need to be like Islam. We don't need to make Buddha, Muhammad, and Jesus kind of the same figures. They serve different purposes in their respective religious traditions. It's important and it's crucial that we think about difference as being the important thing when we consider world religions and what it means to be religious. Sports for many are just as impactful as religions. And as we'll see kind of in the next two slides when we talk about nuns and atheists. For some people, maybe people who identify as a nun, people N-O-N-E, I should say, not nun like a convent. They may think that, or they may see sports as being their the most important way that they can commune with other people. At the end of the day, religion for a lot of people is about community. It's about tradition, and it's about an identity, a purpose, and a worldview. So sports can offer that for people who maybe are disenchanted with the idea of religion. And finally, I'll close with this. I want you to think about what the difference is between a religious experience and a religion. Is attending a sporting event a religious experience, or are sports religions? Your two readings for this week, aside from the Price reading, were from the Pew Research Center and National Geographic. So they're both talking about atheism and nuns and what both of these things mean, okay? So again, nun, N-O-N-E, like no religious affiliation. So the Pew Research article was written in 2018. So keep that in mind, that was 3 years ago. And while that may not seem that far, when we're talking about hard data, we want it always to be pretty recent. And you can even see on the bottom of this graphic, it was actually, the survey was conducted in 2017 of December. So we're just over 3 years from when the data was originally collected. So looking at this graph, I like this one because I think it encompasses a lot of the things the article was trying to say. And it actually is the graph that most of the article was writing off of. So Pew says, most religious nuns say questioning religious teachings is an important reason that they are unaffiliated. Let me read that again. Most religious nuns say that questioning religious teachings is an important reason they are unaffiliated. Okay? The grappling with, the wrestling with religious teachings, things that we learn, things that people have taught us. Among US adults whose religious identity is atheist, agnostic, or nothing in particular, percents who say blank is a very important reason they are unaffiliated. And that blank is the next couple of things, okay? So the main reason for a lot of people was questioning a lot of the religious teachings. Specifically for the people who identify as nothing in particular, this is the highest one, questioning religious teachings. The next one, I don't like the positions churches take on social political issues. I don't like religious organizations. I don't believe in God. And this is going to be particularly high for those who identify as atheists, since that is a core foundation of atheism, is this lack of a theistic God, lack of a God. Religion is irrelevant to me. It doesn't matter. I don't like religious leaders. In some ways, this graph is skewed a little bit towards Christianity. They use things like churches. They use the ideas of God, right? We know not all religions have a God. Not all religions have a church. Very few have the idea of a church or call it a church, okay? So we can actually learn some things from this graph by just reading it and not knowing a lot about the data sets that they used. So the article uses these three sample groups: atheists, agnostics, and nothing in particular. The nuns said the main reason they left was questioning the religious teaching, followed by God, followed by they don't like the church's position on social and political issues. I don't have a lot to offer you about this article. The main reason that I'm having you read these two is to offer you a different way of thinking about religion, to think about religious communities. Okay, so we have sports on the one hand. Can sports be religions? Can sports be religious communities? On the other hand, I'm telling you that, yeah, atheist communities, they could count as religious organizations. They probably would not use that language. Religion is a very specific word. It has a lot of baggage. It has a lot of specific connotations. But if we're trying to think about what it means to be a religion, what religion means, we could think about these groups kind of in the same categories of wrestling with these specific ideas of religion, definitions, and categories. So the other article that you could have read was the National Geographic piece. And again, this one is really, really similar, pretty short, offers a lot of good data sets. This article was written in 2016, so this one's even more dated than the other one. So as we can see on the graph, even the data on the graph is from 2015. So more than half the people on the planet call themselves Christian or Muslim, okay? As you read in the Prothor reading for the Islam Week, Islam is actually second to Christianity, but it's growing more rapidly than Christianity, okay? So making their faiths the largest in at least 200 discrete countries. Looking beyond the majority, however, reveals interesting patterns of belief indicative of former connections and future developments. So looking at this graph, we can see a lot of different things happening. One of the major ones we see is the growing group of nuns. They call this atheist and agnostic, okay? So the Pew Center actually had three categories, where nun was one of them. And agnostic and atheist on this graph are actually included under the category of nun. So I actually disagree with this one a little bit, that nuns, I disagree with the idea of the nun, right? Because I do think in some ways these communities of agnostic and atheist do hold similar religious patterns in how they form community, okay? I don't want to use the word religion because that's not something that these communities would likely use about themselves, and I don't want to project onto them, but I am saying that I don't necessarily like that they are housed under the idea of none, okay? Because atheism doesn't mean that they have nothing, right? It means that they don't believe in the idea of a deity, the idea of a God. Christian on the map is blue. We actually see that kind of small. Muslim is green. Hindu is this red brown color. Buddhist is yellow, and those are super hard to find. They're kind of at the bottom of Asia. Ethno-religious, this would be local or tribal religion. Indigenous cultures, again, I don't like the idea of local tribal religion. That sounds a little it sounds dismissive, okay? So we would call these indigenous traditions or indigenous practices, and these can vary. This is a really large catch-all term for the idea that different communities have their own specific integrated practices. And I wouldn't necessarily even use the word religion there either. Okay. So again, religion, the idea of religion comes with its own baggage. So we would call indigenous communities, indigenous traditions, local or tribal religions is a little dismissive. And then finally, the idea of other religions. Chinese folk religion, we would call this perhaps religions of China and Japan, religions of Asia, and these might be something that crosses Taoism, Hinduism, maybe even ancestral religious experiences, the Baha'is, new religious movements, spiritists. Again, some of these words are a little dated. These are not all things that I would like, but I want you to get a kind of a sense of the graph, especially with how things are moving and changing. So one of the questions that the article poses is religion becoming less important? I don't have an answer for this. I don't have an answer to give you, but I do think this is something really interesting to take forward, because over time people have said God is dying, religion is dying, the young people aren't going to church, the young people aren't religious. And I don't think that's necessarily true. I think that the formalized religion that maybe our grandparents knew, or the formalized religion of the early 1900s, is not the same, but nothing stays the same. Nothing ever stays the same. And if things don't change, we don't grow. We don't have progress. So I think there are ways that religion is just as important. It's just different. Okay. And finally, one of the questions that the National Geographic article wrestles with is the idea of the atheism diversity problem. And we've seen this with other communities of people, other religious organizations. A lot of atheist groups, so atheist communities where people are in community together with one another, are predominantly white. Okay, so I just want you to think about this moving forward. Again, this issue of whiteness. What does whiteness do in religious spaces? How does it operate? And what does it illuminate about the way that we think about religion? So your Instagram prompt this week should be pretty fun, okay? So I want you to pick something that encompasses the idea of material religion and sports, okay? Using the Price reading, offer some perspective on how the object, image, or artifact you picked represents religion and sport. And you can be as critical or as non-critical as you want. If you want to really lean into this idea of one-to-one comparison, okay? If sports can be religion, can anything be religious? That's fine, okay? But I want you to really be imaginative and be creative. I know we have a lot of athletes in the class, and this would be a really great time for me to hear from you. How does your relationship to your sport feel religious? How do the rituals, the practices, the sense of community, how does that feel to you? What does that suggest? Again, I remember I told you that I swam in college. In many ways, the community that I formed, the ritual of going to practice, when I ate meals, when I went to sleep, all of these things were really important to my success in my sport, in the same way that religions themselves pride discipline and respect and authority, okay? So even think about your own experiences in sport as a college athlete, as a high school athlete, okay? Examples of this could be things like a crowded stadium. What does this make you think of? How does this elicit religious experience? Tailgating. I love tailgating. But there's many ways that it's like a ritual. It's like particular religious experiences of being around a shared communal table with people at a specific event commemorating a specific moment. People at a bar watching a screen. As I said, in the times of COVID, sports have been really different. We can't really go to games. So what are we doing instead? And then even regionally specific sports. The one I'm thinking of is Bills Mafia. Okay, so the people who are Buffalo Bills fans, I think this happens a lot more in the Northeast than it does in the South. So this kind of really extreme regional affiliation to like an NFL team. And you don't have to use football. These are just the ones that are coming to mind. Lastly, think about what it means for something to count. What does it mean to count as religion? What does religion even mean? What is the category? Does it have to have a God? Does it have to have scripture? And then what does sports teach us about religion as a whole? Okay. Our discussion board prompt: the relationship between sports and religion is not new. From the Olympic Games in Greece to the indigenous game of lacrosse, religion and sports have held space for rituals, tradition, community, and commitment. This week, please respond to Price's article. either disagreeing or agreeing with his argument that sports are a popular form of religion and that the fans who watch them are participating in a certain religious fanaticism. Use evidence from the text to back up your claim. Then spend a few sentences discussing how these readings fit together. Why did I put sports and religion with atheism? What do these things have to do with the study of religion? Wrapping up. Well, this was it. You made it to our final PowerPoint lecture. First, let me start by saying thank you so much for an amazing 6 weeks. I have enjoyed learning from you. I've enjoyed so much about hearing about your own experiences in religion or the things that you find interesting. I know it may not seem like it, and I know sometimes discussion boards seem boring, but I actually love them. I love reading what you have to say. I love hearing about your personal experiences. And I've even really loved getting you all to open up to critique some of these things, to disagree with them, because you're allowed to. You're allowed to disagree with authors and scholars. You're allowed to disagree with me, okay? So ultimately, a few things that I really want you to take forward. Religion is messy, and it's complicated, and it's not one thing. We can't offer a definition of religion. That's why we don't have one. That's why I didn't start this class by telling you a definition of religion. I don't have one, and you don't have one. What religion is so different and so varied to so many different communities that even by offering you a definition to start this class, this very short term, would do more harm than good. Because religions can be theistic, they can be non-theistic. Religions can be thousands of people, they can be 5. Religions can be communities that have a place of worship that's permanent, or religions can be communities that have a place of worship that are temporary, that they tear down every week. Religions can have music and they cannot have music. Religions can have text or they could not have text. Religions could be global or they could be only in one small village, in one small town, in one tiny country. There's no way for me to express to you the vastness and the breadth of religion and the idea of what it means to be a religion. The one thing that I really want you to take forward is that difference is important, and it's important that we think about difference and that we emphasize difference and that we accept difference as being a crucial and an integral part to understanding people. If we compare everything all the time, we're never going to learn anything about other people. We're always going to be wondering, how are they like me? What parts of them are like parts of me? I want you to think about what makes them different. What parts of them are different than parts of me? That's how we learn about other people. That's how we learn about religion. And that's how we understand religion to be something that is personal and communal, something that is passed down and something that's new. Ultimately, I hope that you leave this class with a better idea of religion and religious studies, and the things that religion can teach us moving forward, not just about our own, about other people's. And with that, I leave you with my favorite quote that I started the semester with. My goal in this class was to make things that seem familiar strange, and to make things that seem strange more familiar.